Hello there and welcome to the video. We have a rest day at the FIDE World Cup. So I thought I'd look at an interesting game from the tiebreaks yesterday. The game happened between Vidit and Adhiban, the Indian battle. They had quite the matchup, quite the tiebreak. But before I do that, I want to look at an endgame position. So you have the white pieces, but you have a bishop. And this is something I like to do with my students, and I ask them, where do you want to place your bishop? Do you want a light squared bishop or do you want a dark squared bishop? So a dark squared bishop maybe go somewhere around the king. Light squared bishop might go to a secure square, protecting the pawn. So tell me which one feels more natural to you, which one would you choose and why? I'd love to hear from you in the comments, what you think. I'm not going to give you the solution. We're going to head on to the game and see what happened in the game. Now let's get the clocks. In the classical, they each won a game, and they played the 25-10 and they drew both of their games, and then Vidit won the first 10-minute rapid game with the black pieces, so he only needs a draw here to advance. Adhiban needs to win to advance to the blitz tiebreaks 5-3. And we have the red team, and we quickly transpose to the English opening, c4, c5, the 4 knights English, symmetrical English, g3, g6, and Adhiban breaks the symmetry with d6, which is logical since he needs to win, and we have d4 by white. Takes, and bishop d7. So since we played d6, we're able to play bishop d7, which is, I think, generally considered a pretty decent option to have. There are lines where black has castled and placed d6 as a pawn sacrifice. If we go back, instead of d6, like this, castles, d4 takes. I believe here d6 is actually, let's make sure I have the right position. I believe d6 is a line that people play here for black, trying to get some play for the pawn. White can for sure take the pawn, but then bishop h3 will land on the board and black will get some initiative. But back to the game, d6, and after takes we have bishop d7, so we are able to protect the knight on c6. The knight goes to b3, and we should be around equal. White has this c pawn that's a little bit more advanced than a d pawn, so he has some space, but black has more pawns in the center. But too early to speak of anything of that sort really. a5, intending to poke white with a4. White plays a4. I think around here we had a new game. c5 was played, and very often white would like to take on d6 to inflict the pawn weakness. But first, Adhiban counterattacks on b3, bishop g5. We have h6 and takes. So white gives up the bishop pair, and we see these bishops, they have tremendous diagonals here, bearing down on the white queen side. White prefers here rook c1 and knight b4. So we also have this outpost for a knight here, and judging by the time they've spent already, a bit of a time match for Adhiban already, suggesting that Vidit might not have been too happy with what was going on. Knight comes into d4, and we want to keep this bishop, so bishop to g4. I might add that after knight here, it's probably dangerous to take this pawn. I think we can flick in this one. And who wants to play with after this and takes with the bishop on b7? And if you retreat, I can take your exchange by playing this. So probably a poisonous pawn. So therefore, knight d4, bishop g4, and still a poisonous pawn if you take on b7 now. Black will take on c5, and if you take on a8, I take on d4, and you have two pieces hanging. So instead, we did play h3. We have takes on c5, knight back to b3, and bishop f5. So now white has a choice: take here or take here. He went for take on c5, b6. And now if you take on a8, the queen will be strong here on this square, and coupled with the knight being attacked and the bishop landing here on h3 with an attack and a mating threat, we win the material back. So the knight retreated, bishop to g7, keeping the bishop, strong bishop, and e3. Usually a useful move. It's kind of a structural move. You put the pawns on dark squares and you have a light squared bishop. It usually works well together. Queen e2, queen d3. And we see now that Vidit is just way down on the clock, not happy with what's going on here. He avoids the queen trade, queen to c4, rook c to d1, the knight to d3. The knight is landing in an even prettier spot here. There's b3, but Adhiban just takes. And now if you take this, I can probably just take on e4. The knight is pinned, and if I take with the queen, I take on c3. And I'm happy with life. I might even take on c3. So knight d5 was the preferred move. We see now if you take on d5, there's knight f6 check, winning the queen. So Adhiban simply protected the pawn. And now knight d2. Now if you take the pawn, there's going to be e4 with complications. Black has many moves including queen a2, but queen a3 is not one of the good moves, because after e4 only the queen is defending the knight. After knight b1, black is in trouble. And it looks like Vidit got too greedy here. We see that now Adhiban is also in time trouble. And we can simply take this and we're doing fine. I mean, black is going to try to, make something happen with the two passes on the queen side, but he's down material. But Vidit went for the pawn on b6. But this allows a counterattack, and black actually escapes now. The queen e3, we have a knight c4. Now if you trade on c4, black just has an extra pawn with the bishop covering the queen square. So took on a4. He's currently up a piece, but there's bishop to b3. Very annoying. We can't go here to protect because of the bishop, the strong bishop. Once again, knight b6. Now we take on e2. And now white does emerge with two minor pieces for the rook, but black also has an extra pawn, and what a pawn it is. It's this a pawn, and we know that an a pawn is the worst. Well, a pawn, a rook's pawn, is the worst enemy for a knight, and after a4 white will struggle to contain this pawn. The bishop can come here and we keep pushing. Bishop e5, rook behind the pawn, took an e7, trying to get one pawn back, but now we're pushing the pawn and we have to sacrifice. So now black is up the exchange. We do have an extra pawn, but maybe not the most useful one. King f2, h5, king f3, and bishop to e5. So our aim is to maybe target this pawn if we can. So white tries to keep it under control. The knight is fine on d5. White is trying to keep control here in the position, and now Adhiban tries to move forward. And I wonder if this trade was good. Maybe it's more likely that we can defend if we somehow try to keep the knight and the bishop together, defend these squares. But I think now we have a lost ending for white, and Adhiban went for the trade here, and then played after a rook check. Eventually he played h4 to trade off these pawns. And this ending is, believe it or not, it's winning for black. Now remember, at the start I asked you if you wanted a light squared bishop or a dark squared bishop. The correct answer is a dark squared bishop. So if we had, even if we didn't have this pawn, if we have a dark squared bishop that's attacking this pawn, we keep black tied down trying to defend the pawn. So he can never attack our pawn, that would be on e4, because he would need resources to defend his own pawn. When we have a bishop of the same color, like this, it's too passive and we're going to lose. And we're going to find out in this game. So the key here is that, first of all, we have to win this pawn. Then we get the endgame that we looked at the start, which I asked you about. But it's clear that with the king here and the bishop on this diagonal, this king needs to come around. It needs to walk over to the other side and it needs to reach the key square d2. From there we can win the e3 pawn. So it takes a few moves, it seems, for Adhiban to realize, but then he starts to head over with the king. We see they're basically playing an increment, so maybe he first wanted to make a few moves just to, you know, gain some time. And okay, Adhiban's technique here at times isn't the best, but okay, he's walking the king over. That's the basic plan. White can only wait, so I mean, we don't really have to discuss what White is doing. He has to keep this king out, but can he do it? So bishop waits, bishop waits. So he tries to keep the king out. We can't let the king in, so we're trying to keep the king out. Rook c7, bishop e5. Now the king comes a little bit more closer, and maybe we want to come here and here if you can. So king d2, rook check, and the king tries to enter, but I can't just yet. So we need to find a way through. And it seems like he was struggling through this part, and you know, playing only on 10 seconds each move. I can understand. But here he should have checked on d8, and then he would get the king closer. But he went with king b3. Eventually he checked. Okay, and king c3. So it amounts to the same thing. Then we have this check. Then we attack the bishop. And when the bishop moves, the king finally reaches the key square. d2. And now all that's left is to maneuver the rook and just take the pawn. If the king starts to run like he did, we take with the king and then come here. We defend in time. And now in fact we're threatening to just take this bishop and win the pawn line game. Bishop e7 was played, rook d8, and Vidit actually resigned. Even if he had the perfect king position, this will be lost. But this move is coming. Let's say we come here. I'm just going to play this. We're going to play here and take the pawn. So let's give White a little bit more breathing room. Let's make a blunder. Let's give him some checks. And king here. Now the thing to know here is we can't do this now. We can't just blindly, actually we should go here. We can't just blindly take the pawn like this, because White would have the opposition and this would be a draw. So we would need to maneuver around and kick the king away. We need to kick it away so that it is like here. We need to block it off to the side. If you can do that, we can take the pawn because there's no opposition. And you can play around and try to figure it out on your own, but the technique is quite easy. You just have to get the king away, and then you can take the pawn, avoid the opposition, and you have a winning pawn line game. So that was the endgame lesson of today. An exciting game from the FIDE World Cup. Adhiban won on demand with the black pieces, and they went to the blitz tiebreak, and unfortunately for Adhiban, Vidit came out on top. Quite an epic battle between two very strong Indian grandmasters, but this time it was Vidit who advances to the fourth round. And I hope to see you when the fourth round commences tomorrow. See you then. Bye bye.